Hey guys, this is the first lecture on formalism in our series, and you know, it's all really personal. And for our purposes, I'm calling this Mark's ascending apex of aesthetic rest because it is very idiosyncratic, say the least. But aesthetics, basically, I'll let you guys read this and pause it as you want, but it's basically what anyone thinks is beautiful. I mean, we look at things and we try to decode things, not only in art, but in everything that we look out there and see and do. Um, and some of what we see is boring, and some of it is confusing and intimidating. And that's where I'm coming from with this organization, is that sometimes I've looked at art, and I love art, as I've always have as a kid all the way up. And so when I vibe on it, it's just easy. And then sometimes I'm like, what? And it makes me feel kind of silly or stupid because I don't get it. And so that is what I'm addressing here, because art is something that we should all, quote unquote, get. And we all do. It's just a matter of definition. But we need to make a construct in our own mind so we sort of understand what we're looking at, and it's not so mysterious. And what we're trying to get at is why something works for us, the meaning. And we'll go back to this diagram, but I'm just throwing it out there because here's the bottom line. You all know what aesthetic arrest. You all know what you like. You all know what beauty is, because anytime you tell someone that you care about, that you feel comfortable with, oh, dude, you got to go see this art show, or you've got to go to this place and just look. You got to read the book. You've got to see this movie. Oh, you have to hear this song. This song is so good. And print out the lyrics because the lyrics are amazing. Anyways, you get it, right? Go down the line, and you've all had this experience of being moved by something and wanting to share it. That's because you were in aesthetic rest by that object or that art form. Is that art form, whatever it happened to be, a movie, a song, a painting, a sculpture, or even a pot, caused you to have what we're talking about here. And understanding why that happened and being able to recreate it is the big secret, right? And so this is Mark's idea of what it means to get to the top donut. What's the donut of lusciousness? And you will create one for yourself too. But the top part is that. It's why something does it for you, right? It's all these reasons, and we'll talk more about them later. All this stuff. But the basic foundation is you have something you're talking about. You have something you're using in your hands, or using on your computer, or manipulating in some way to make it, and then you have some motivation to use those things to express something. And the motivation is all about time, intent, materials, discipline, initiative, and passion. Any artwork that you see started out with this basic foundation. Look at it and think about it. It's kind of true. But for our purposes, the next step up is all we're going to talk about. What are the basics, the most fundamental building blocks, the 7 elements? And there are synonyms for these, but they are basically line, value, color, shape, form, and texture, space. That's all we're going to start with. How do you find those out there in the world? And how do you find them in clay? So you're going to find 2 examples each. 2 out there somewhere in the world and 2 in clay. And just as a coming attraction, there's also, for coming weeks and coming, examinations that we're going to go through and explorations, we'll look at the organizing variables. How do you take those things through balance, movement, emphasis, repetition, and transition to carefully and hopefully magically create a cool composition that has a certain context and scale and does that thing at the top, which is knock your socks off, make you think, oh, wow, what a job. I'm not sure how you did it, but boy, you did a good job with that. You're getting this, right? So anyways, this is formal aesthetics, but it makes total sense if you realize it's all about the top. It's all about why something moves you, why you care at all. why it has meaning to you. So let's go down to the bottom again and start with the elements. And here's what you're going to do. You're going to look through these, and you're going to find examples of line. And here's the, a line is not a line is not a line. Every line has a different kind of quality, a different kind of gesture. They're expressive, descriptive, mechanical, etc. Right? So you can find examples like this. This is a line out there in the world. You see them all the time. That's a line. But even though the sculpture is the obvious example, there's also lines on the parameter around the thing, the shadows. The building has lines. Same thing here in China. Or this guy, Pablo, knew his way around a line in creating narratives, in describing things. And wow, I mean, he's one of my heroes as far as being able to use lines descriptively and narratively. And if you see his work in person, it has even that much more nuance, each line does. All right, also Hockney, with the economy of line, using it and using huge amounts of open space in his compositions, but the lines are just gorgeous, right? And then they're stacked up to create a sense of emphasis and value of light and dark within the compositions. But line being a dominant characteristic of Hockney. Schiele, oh my gosh, how the weight of his lines, how deeply he pressed or lightly came, faint descriptive lines and then heavy descriptives, and always in Schiele's work a sense of searching. So I'm just showing these as examples of a simple concept that a line is not a line is not a line. And look out there in the world too, and you'll find all kinds of lines out in architecture, and you'll also find them in pots and in ceramic sculpture. And for example here, Frank Boyden's incredible sensitive use of lines to describe fish, and Volkos too. And you'll see other examples of his work in other lectures just this week. Volkos, again, one of the kind of, how would you say it, kind of huge, characters in ceramic art in the 20th century. And what amazing work he did, but line being so important. And Carl, our buddy Carl, and his use of line, and one of my old instructors, and his, almost quick sketches, but what dramatic, different kinds of weights of line. Value. So we have line, now we have value. And value is basically what causes us to see a three-dimensional object as having volume and form. And that is because of the light cast on it, which has a gradient to it, right? So we see the sculpture because of the variations of value on the sculpture because of the light cast on it. So it's something that's implied. I mean, emo girl here with her dramatic brow is only emo girl with the dramatic brow because of the value that is created by the light that's cast. And in three-dimensional objects, you create the scenario for that, right? In a sculpture, you create the scenario for the sense of value. In two-dimensional work, and then sometimes you paint it right on, right? You create the sense of a volume because you painted it on. But in a three-dimensional work, you also simply, by creating the object, it's implied. All right, and Rembrandt, and here's a self-portrait of his dapper young self, and it's all about reading him in that cavalier attitude is the value on his, that's created by the gradient of light and dark on his face. And the drama here of the poor guy and the heavy values of shadow and the value of those shadows, which adds to the drama, right? It's not subtle, it's dramatic, light or dark, right? So yeah, great composition and great use of value to make a dramatic effect, right? In a humorous dramatic effect. Color. So we had line, value, color. And here, I mean, whole books have been written on this stuff. And I'll let you go through and figure out the difference between primary, secondary, tertiary, complementary. But wow, are you relaxed now? I mean, look at that. That having to do with color, but also having to do with horizontal composition, narrative, and the subtlety of light, but the gentleness of this kind of color composition also belies the gentleness of the culture that produced it. And in nature, different kinds of composition and manipulated by us. And artists that use color to create dramatic, emotional content, right? Like Van Gogh here. Or lusciousness, like the Thibaut. Or starkness and confrontational juxtapositions like Warhol. So how does color affect you? Look at these objects and think about it. How is this so grounded and earthy and then ethereal at the top? Totally because of the use that Magritte made of color. All right. And Schiele's drama and, creating a backdrop of color and high contrast of color to emphasize his, and talk about emotional content in a piece based on color dramatically, right? I mean, there's also the figures, but the red, the black, the white, the green. I mean, do you think they have emotional and or symbolic content? Wow, impressive. Okay, shape. Shape, generally being two-dimensional, are things that you're going to look for that create areas even within three-dimensional objects. But in 2D, we think of shape as being two-dimensional, but it's not just two-dimensional. You also find two-dimensional shapes out there in three-dimensional space, and you just need to see it. You also see things that are there and not there that are also part of the whole thing. You see it, you get it, right? And same thing here with Homer, with the shape of the windows, but the shape of the shadows. All of it is so much a part of the deal. Form having to do with something that is actually a physical volume, a physical mass that, as opposed to a shape, which tends to be two-dimensional. But we look out and we see things like this, and you're going to find two that you see in ceramics and two that you just find out there in the world or in other kinds of art, right? As in the Dogon sculpture, as in Deborah Butterworth's piece, as in the big baby head. But all these examples of form, and form that is accentuated by, the woman's body is accentuated by the other shapes on top, right? And these forms are camouflaged by the patterns on top. So there's dramatic ways that you can manipulate forms. Forms can be accentuated with textures. Forms can be just streamlined. This is all about the form because there's nothing to get in the way of seeing it, and it's a matte color. Texture, consider how texture describes the surface of so much and how you can use it in clay, right? You're going to find two examples that are out there in nature, and you're also going to find two that are ceramics. How is texture an important part of art, and how is it just an important part of everything that we see? And space can be positive, negative, right? And we see different areas based on not only what we see out there as the objects, but what's in between and what's not there, as you see here, a good example. Escher was a master of the positive and negative, the yes and no of composition, right? As is here, and as did Homer, and as Homer also did in these moody environments, right? All about the mood of not being there, what's there and what's not there, and what's lonely, right? Okay, enough for now. You are going to try to find examples of each of these, two in clay and two not in clay. And that is your assignment for this week. All right, talk to you next time.